So this morning we have Mark McAfee, who is the CEO and founder of Organic Pastures Dairy, which is a leading brand of organic raw milk, especially in this area. But he also, I think, you ship nationwide. It serves 425 stores in California and more than 1,500 stores nationally and in Canada, and is certified organic. He's going to talk today on the how we should be using milk and raw dairy, raw milk and raw dairy, specifically over pharmacies. So how does the nutrition of raw milk allow us to generate, immunity and good health? Mark trained as a EMS paramedic with 15,000 calls in 16 years of service. He worked as a paramedic instructor and a medical educator. He's a pilot and flies for Doctors of Mercy for 28 years. And he is a husband and wife to Blaine and father of 2 grown children. And I believe many of them help him in his dairy. So thank you, Mark, for coming, and we look forward to hearing you talk.
Thank you. Is my mic okay? All right. Okay. Well, where do we find ourselves? The first thing we want to do is actually give an orientation as to the fact of where we are. This is the Milky Way, was named for milk. So here we are in the Milky Way, little Earth out here. And today's presentation is going to talk a little bit about farmers over pharmacies, the fact that the immune system and the digestive tract literally runs our immune system in our bodies. It's not the drugs we take, it's the foods we eat that determine how healthy we are. So let's just start out with that. We're kind of living in the Goldilocks zone, which is not too hot, not too cold, just right for life. And we're living this little Earth embryo here where, it's 24,000 miles in diameter, but only about 15,000 feet thick of oxygen. So it's a very thin veil of place that we live. And the scientists tell us that the first forms of life on Earth were the archaeobacteria. The archaeobacteria are still in our gut today. The archaeobacteria have the primitive DNA that came out of the oceans, the warm cauldrons of the ocean. So it's interesting that those bacteria are pre-bacteria, but they form bacteria, and they're the roots of our life that we have today on Earth. So we're very much born of the Earth biome. We're not separate from it. We're part of it, and we're born of it. And everything in this little wonderful sphere of this biome of life is interrelated. It's holistically interrelated. From the roots, literally, of our soils to the villi in our intestines, we're all very much connected. And the archaea was the first form of this life, sustained by a matching inner space and outer space biome altogether. And that's really interesting because we're having a crisis right now on our Earth with global warming and all those kinds of issues. We're also having an inner crisis of inner global warming. It's not warm, it's actually cooling. We're having a serious problem in our gut because the fact it's superheated with a really bad immune system, and our guts are falling apart. So our Earth biome and our gut biome are very much connected and having a big crisis right now. If we think about raw milk and its purpose, its evolutionary purpose, it's fascinating. What is the first food of life? Well, it's breast milk. For mammals, it's breast milk. And what does it do? Well, baby is born, it does not have a functional immune system. And what does raw milk do? It builds an immune system in a baby that did not have one before being delivered. So it's a powerful food in that it builds an immune system that did not exist. In the United States today, and most first world countries, our immune systems are in crisis failure. We have a major problem with the fact that our guts are not functioning properly, and 80% of our immune system is the biodiversity of bacteria and the food that feeds it in our gut. So there's a gift here. A gift to the baby comes from mom, but also raw milk can give those that are suffering immune depression and having challenges in their life literally immune system transformation, a transfusion in their gut. By just consuming raw milk, you get those beneficial things that you would get for the first form of life on Earth, actually in later times in life. So it's pretty powerful what a gift raw milk is if we really think about the fact that there's no, doctors don't say don't breastfeed your baby. They say absolutely breastfeed your baby. It's really, really important that you breastfeed your baby. But then the advice goes sideways in a car wreck when the baby's 6, 8, 10 months old, mom stops breastfeeding, and they say, oh, use an ultra high temperature pasteurized or some other kind of baby formula or something. don't use something mirroring mother's breast milk, which is biodiverse, enzyme-rich, filled with fats, animal fats. So it's kind of very interesting that we see this conflict in medicine when we say, breastfeed your baby, it's so important for the baby's immune system and their brain development, but then later they give them a low-fat, ultra-high processed product that's completely devoid of any kind of nutrition in terms of the enzymes or the proteins that are not denatured. That's total conflict, and then you wonder why your kids turn out sick. Kind of interesting. The history of raw milk is very, very interesting. It goes back a long time, like 10,000 years, in terms of us living on Earth. Really think about it. Man's out of the pasture and he's starving because he can't eat the grass. He doesn't have 4 stomachs like a cow does. And so, okay, did it fall off? We'll edit this part out. Sorry. Technical failure here.
This on where it'll stay.
There we go. Thank you for coming to my rescue here.
There we go.
That better? Okay. Now we're live again. But think about it. Man's got his family and his children, and the sun's shining, and there's lots of grass, and there's a camel, goat, sheep, horse, muskox, goat eating grass. We can't eat the grass because we don't have 4 stomachs. Well, he would either have to hunt, fish, or farm to have some food. And farming took a while. Sometimes hunting didn't work out so well, and fishing was good, but sometimes it didn't work out so well either. But if you had a cow that could convert sunshine, which is manifest as grass, and you could eat today, and you could take that cow with you wherever you went, and you could have that cow eating the grass, converting sunshine into food you could eat today. If you got really hungry, you could eat the cow. So a phenomenal way for mankind to actually have a competitive advantage because they had portable food. And guess what? That raw whole milk was a whole food. You could survive entirely on it if you had to. And by the way, what's old milk called? Cheese. So you could take that cheese and store it for months or years. So all around the world, you found people that actually capitalized on that relationship of domesticating a mammal so they capture their milk so they had food to eat today. But we forget about that in the last 100 years because you go to the store and get food. You don't think about where your food comes from. But you know what? It came from conversion of the sunshine grass to the mammalian milk. Civilizations all over the world depended on, camels, sheep, goats, cows, reindeer. Wherever you could get a mammal to eat some grass, you were good to go. It was good for food right now. You didn't have to wait. It was portable. You could bring it along. It became friendly. We actually started to share the genome with these animals so that a lot of our genetics are actually shared, which is kind of interesting. There's even cross-immunity. Smallpox, the immunity to that, the milk maidens were immune because of the connection to the cow, because of the cowpox virus. So a very interesting cross-immunity with the animals we actually cohabited with. All through time, we were able to have that wonderful cross-immunity, which actually saved our lives sometimes too. A biodiversity of bacteria, we'll talk about that a little bit more, but raw milk is not a sterile food. Raw milk has a biodiversity, means different kinds of flora, all kinds of different kinds of bacteria in it. Breast milk has how many kinds of bacteria? Well, the scientists tell us about 700 different kinds of bacteria. And if you ever seen a mom breastfeed, they don't sterilize their breast before they put the baby in. They just whip it out and go to town. And that's purpose, because the fact you need to have that biodiversity of bacteria to be in the digestive tract of that baby. And that's how the baby develops an immune system, the biodiversity of bacteria for the digestive tract. And when it's fermented, it has a massive amounts of bacteria. So if you think about a cow being milked and the farmer getting the milk, yeah, he had that milk, but it was put into an unclean container because sanitation was unheard of from last week's milk. And that milk was sat around for 24 hours and was not chilled. So it grew into yogurt, and that was good given to the families and the communities around them. So a lot of kefir was consumed, which is incredibly powerful for the immune system because it has a very high level of bacteria and a very biodiverse level of bacteria and the food to feed it because it's a whole food. The oligosaccharides, the sugars, so on and so forth, feeds the bacteria. So powerful food for the millennia, for a long, long time that people have been using to consume. So pretty powerful stuff here, and you see this not only in Africa, you see this all across America and in Mongolia. A recent research just came out of Mongolia, which I find fascinating. I call pasteurization and the processing very racist. Because the processors always say, oh, you're the wrong color, you're the wrong race of person, you've got a sensitivity, you have lactose intolerance, you have something wrong with you. when in fact that's not true at all. When you study the races around the world, the people from Africa absolutely have no problem consuming raw milk because it's cultured, and the cultures actually enter the gut and allow the digestion of the milk by itself because the biome is such that it's reflecting the bacteria. Even though their genetics show that they're not supposed to be able to digest raw milk, they do very, very well with it. No problem at all. In Mongolia, the same thing. Although the Chinese are very lactose intolerant, those in Mongolia sharing the same genetics have no problem digesting the raw milk from horses because, in fact, of the culturing process. Genetic markers show they do not have lactase persistence, but they have no problem with lactose intolerance. So it's really interesting to say that raw milk is a universal food for all mankind, regardless of your race or your genetics, because it's cultured. It's part of the whole process that Mother Nature provided for us. So raw milk is not racist. It's uniform food for all people. Pretty cool stuff. The seeds of life. Pretty interesting that 700 different kinds of bacteria found in breast milk, which, wow, it's not sterile. This idea of sterility is really a misnomer. And we'll talk about that a little bit more about the fact of how critical it is that we have bacteria in our lives and around our lives. One more here. The science behind this is pretty powerful. It was only discovered a few years ago, this science part. And Dr. Bonnie Basler, who is one of the MIT Princeton researchers for the human genomics study and the genetics of what makes us human, which was a $4 billion study. It took about 12 years, started in the 1980s and 90s, and it was released to Congress, and the findings were released to Congress in 2002 and 2003. Found that, we found what makes us genetically human, because the military, the Department of Energy, was wanting to know what would the effects be on our soldiers in nuclear power plants. And it wasn't the medical community that was interested about what makes us genetically human. It was the military and the energy department. Well, they found that, yes, you have 23,000 genes that you got from mom and dad, 23andMe. It's now the big rage, right, looking at genetics. But there's millions of genes that don't come from mom and dad. They actually come from the environment, and they come from the foods you eat in your digestive tract. And that's really interesting because there's a 10-to-1 relationship between the number of cells you have in your body, your human cells you have in your body, and the number of bacterial cells you have in your body. 10-to-1. There's 10 times more bacterial cells by cell count in your body than you have human cells in your body. But that's not the end of the story. The story gets even more rich. If you look at this number here, there's a 100-to-1 ratio of the contribution of genetics to your body. So you have so much genetic genes coming from bacteria being shared at the cellular level back and forth with your body than you do from your genomics of what you got inherited from mom and dad. So it's incredibly powerful that, in fact, we are bacteriosapiens. We absolutely rely on the genes from the bacteria in and on our body to complete our genome so we function properly. And people that get rid of their bacteria by taking a lot of antibiotics or chemotherapy or preservatives in their food, which, what do? Increase shelf life by getting rid of bacteria, right? Well, you don't want that. Your gut is not a shelf. You want foods that digest quickly and so on and so forth. Well, what you find is that you get an autoimmune mess. Your body starts attacking itself because you're too clean. So beware of the antibiotic. If you take it, you better rebuild yourself because you will have a problem after a while if you take too many antibiotics. Abuse them, they won't work. You create superbugs, and now we're seeing tens of thousands of people dying every year in the United States from the superbugs being created from antibiotic-resistant bacteria created by antibiotic abuse. And antibiotics don't work anymore. So antibiotics are a wonderful tool if you're really sick and you need them, but they only work if you don't use them very often. What works all the time is a strong immune system. And that's why it's so important to rebuild and build your immune system all the time by using whole foods which support your immune system. Raw milk being a great one because it's got all this great bacteria and the food to feed it, and it's got all kinds of other proteins and things that are powerful in terms of building it. So that's the science behind why we need bacteria in our bodies. Absolutely critical. It's the newest science. It's just 15 years old. Even the medical community is trying to scratch their head as to what that's all about. But it's interesting that we have new knowledge now. We're actually starting. The very best, smartest, most advanced doctors now are starting to practice something called biome first medicine. That means come to my office, we'll fix your biome first, and then whatever doesn't get fixed, we'll do it with drugs and surgeries. But biome first medicine is, let's increase the load of bacteria. Let's drink your kombucha, Hannah. And let's increase the biodiversity of that bacteria, and let's decrease body inflammation as a result. So increased load, increased diversity equals body inflammation drop. We do not want chronic inflammation in our bodies. That's what causes and precipitates chronic disease. But what you want is inflammation to spike when you have a problem and go back down to normal, but not be chronically in an overload mode. Raw milk kefir, kombucha, raw milk, all those things, those wonderful whole foods, actually participate in restoring the microbiome of the body. And this is a holistic thing. Being around pets is a good thing. Being in the sunshine is a good thing. Being around dirt is a good thing. Being around whole food nutrition is a good thing. Kissing healthy people is a good thing. Sharing that biome bacteria that Hannah loves to dance about. She does the kombucha dance. But anyway, all these things are to be celebrated because they're super important in terms of biome restoration in a world where a lot of things we do destroy your biome. It's really, really important. Whole foods are that treatment, literally farmers over pharmacies. Farmers over pharmacies. Okay, the big gut biome busters are literally antibiotics, and now we've discovered Roundup. Roundup's ugly. Roundup is an antibiotic. It's classified as an antibiotic by the when it's registered with the government as a pesticide. So it's really scary when you think about what's going on in our world, in our lives, in our treatment, our medical treatments, in our food that actually are gut biome busters. And it's pretty scary. Antibiotic abuse, sterilized processed foods, C-sections are not helping, although they may be very important as far as a medical intervention. They keep the baby from having the inoculum initially, which actually is the beginning of the immune system, along with breastfeeding. So if you're going to have C-section, make sure that there's some interesting transfer between mom and baby to make sure you have that complete transfer of good bacteria. Lack of breastfeeding, right now we only have about 15 to 20% breastfeeding in some areas, sometimes as high as 30%, but breastfeeding is so important. Preservatives in our food. Preservatives are intended to extend shelf life. They have nothing to do with gut life. In fact, they have opposing goals. Roundup pesticides are an antibiotic, and they destroy the gut biome. And now they're known as they're cancer-causing as well. So really, really scared. And then the bacteria paranoia. The fact that we're fear bacteria, we've been taught that we should fear bacteria is really scary. That doesn't mean that you don't wash your hands. That doesn't mean you don't take a bath. It just means be cautious and thoughtful about the fact that you need to preserve your good bacteria in your body and in your body. It's really, really important. We see now that we've got 1 million cases of Crohn's in the United States diagnosed and 130,000 colostomies performed per year. 130,000 colostomies per year. That's pretty scary stuff. That, along with asthma, food allergies, obesity. Asthma by itself is an $82 billion cost, and that's not including the emotional, societal cost of humanity in terms of children that are dying. 13 children will die today from asthma. $82 billion in cost and 13 kids will die because of asthma in the United States. Not to mention all the EMS calls and visits to the ER. So we have a real crisis, and all of this is related to immune system function, and our gut biome. So pretty powerful in terms of this is what a Crohn's disease intestine looks like. This is what it's supposed to look like. And that's inflammation from the fact that you've destroyed the colonies of good bacteria, and you've inflamed it with all the antibiotics and stuff that would be really, really harsh on the intestines. Scary stuff. I was at a presentation yesterday at Highland Springs in Southern California doing a presentation much like this, a little different, but much like it. And I was approached by a young man in his mid-20s who had a colostomy, and he was very thin. His hands were cold when I felt his hands. It was interesting. But he said, you know what? I've completely recovered from my Crohn's because I followed a whole food diet like you talked about 2 years ago. He's no longer on drugs or medication, but he had a colostomy before. So he was actually, after the colostomy, he was going about fixing his Crohn's, and he fixed it completely. He said, is it possible for me to return back to a normal function and get rid of my colostomy bag? I don't know, but he's going to try. Because he got rid of his Crohn's, he'd only had 1 foot of his intestine removed, and now he's going to go back to his doctor and say, hey, I've been on a whole food diet, I've been on raw milk kefir, I've been on bone broths, I've been eating these wonderful foods that regenerated my gut, I no longer have any signs of inflammation, I no longer have pain, I no longer have diarrhea. Now I want to be back to normal. Be interesting to see what happens with that young man. I think he'll be just fine. I think he'll be able to reverse it. And that will be a trend towards something really interesting because it's so expensive to support a colostomy. And it's very uncomfortable, and it's hard to have a normal life. So that's where we are today. This is that crisis. This is what's going on, costing billions of dollars. It's interesting that pharmacies and doctors, they really like long lines of people coming to them saying they need help. There's a lot of money to be made there. So when you have money driving something, it's hard to change it because the doctors have big bills from going to medical school. They've got to pay back loans and stuff, and they like being rich, so why not line up all the people that come get therapy? The bottom line is we can't afford it as a society at any level, economically, emotionally, as a human cost. We can't afford it. What we can afford is much less good medicine and a whole lot more good food. And as a paramedic, I remember going on calls where here we come in with all our stuff and we're going to do an assessment on somebody who's having a medical crisis, and there's always a big pile of medication sticks to them. And there's never any good food in the house. Time after time after time, with rare exception, do we ever see anything different than that. So we have a real problem. It literally, the shift has to go to paying the organic farmers who can give us nutrient-rich foods from good soils, and cows and goats and sheep and even camel here or there, that actually feed our gut. And stop depending on going to the doctor after you get sick for crisis intervention. That's madness on its face. But it's what we do. So we need to wake up. Because if we want to be well and we want to have a next generation that's going to do well, we have to feed this current generation going forward. Super important message here. But it's kind of not resonating with a lot of people. There's some conscious people, but most people are like, I'll drink that Diet Coke, and if I get sick, I'll go to the doctor. Well, that's all the advertisements say. If you get sick, see the doctor. Well, we're saying, don't get sick, see the farmer. And the bottom line, that's just not the lingo being spoken today. Here's the origins of life on Earth. You'll notice that the old archaea bacteria out here began, and it goes out here and makes bacteria, archaea, and eukarya, and it all began with this first form of life on Earth. You see antibiotic resistance up here. You see back in the late 1930s and 40s, you see the penicillin was the first one, saved a lot of lives. It was incredible. World War II, oh my gosh, the soldiers that were hurt got antibiotics and saved their lives. But that antibiotic actually terminated in the late 1960s, was no longer functional. And you can see how these antibiotics have all no longer become functional because of the fact that they become resistant. The first form of life on Earth was bacteria. Do you think it's going to die off real easily? It's going to adapt and overcome and do whatever it has to do to thrive and survive. And the DNA allows it to do so because it sees a threat. Some die off, but some adapt and reproduce, and they become better and bigger. And that's where you see this degradation of the ability of antibiotics to work. And we're kind of running out of them. In fact, we've run out of most of them. Pretty incredible. It's interesting that bacteria resist, they adapt, and they overcome, and they bring us strength when we're born, and they eat us after we're dead. They sustain life on Earth. Pretty powerful there. This right here is the most shocking thing that I think is the greatest gift to medicine that ever happened in post-antibiotics, and that is that the discovery that fecal transplants actually work shocked the medical community about 15 years ago. When you have somebody in the ICU who's dying, literally, their last rites with C. diff, Clostridium difficile, which is an antibiotic-resistant bacteria that grows after you've used all your antibiotics, and the person, it's the only one that you have in your gut, it's killing them because there's sepsis and they're going to die. And they go to a healthy nurse or a family member that's got really good poop. How they figure that out, I'm not sure, but healthy person with good poop. And they take the sample and they go down to the lab, they put it with some saline, they make it into a little mixture, and they flush the lower intestine with that, and the people, 92% of the time, completely thrive. They're fine. They absolutely didn't die. They recovered and they did well. That shocked the medical experts in the medical community because it was not an antibiotic. It wasn't a drug. It was poop. A poop transplant, a poop biome transplant. That is shocking. That is a complete unnerving, crazy thought for a doctor that says this bacteria should be removed from the body versus this bacteria needs to be put back in the body. That is a medical. So that's what really has stirred this whole new generation of thought about biome first and the fact that these bacteria are your friends, not your enemies. And the more friends you have, the fewer enemies you're going to have. So this is powerful stuff, and it actually has caused a major revolution in terms of thinking about bacteria. Really important. Hippocrates was absolutely right when he said, food be your medicine, medicine be your food. All disease begins in the gut, and do no harm. Do no harm is the, Hippocratic oath the doctors are supposed to take. It's pretty tough when you so much of what doctors do now can be life-saving or life-taking. So it's pretty cool. That happened 2,400 years ago. Dr. Jewett over here at UCLA is a friend of mine, dear friend of mine, who does a lot of yogurt research and rat research on this kind of stuff. Absolutely has found that the load and diversity of bacteria absolutely drive inflammation and reduce disease. Pretty cool stuff. She's been to the dairy, and she's actually talked to me at length about this stuff. She's got human rat experiences actually show this, and dog experiences show this really powerfully. This is a really important brochure, and I've got a bunch of them up here for you. But this chart shows some incredible things. Human milk, cow's milk, pasteurized milk, almond milk, and soy milk. And you can see here, human milk and cow's milk have all these incredible different things. Most of them are proteins. And this list actually goes way down here, another 10 feet deeper. This is just the short list. There are so many things found in human breast milk, they haven't even figured out what they are. We haven't got the science to figure it out. And all of these things are interrelated in a matrix of whole foods, put there by 1 million years of evolution, the generation by generation pressures to optimize the food to make sure that baby survived. Because if it didn't, it died off. So this is a gift we as scientists can actually look at and say, what is the gold standard for research of baby food? It's breast milk. Because it says what nature has evolved to be the optimal food for survival of the next generation. Powerful thing here. There's the alkaline phosphatase enzyme right here. Very active. It's the third most prevalent enzyme found in raw milk. Alkaline phosphatase. What's the test for effective pasteurization called? The negative alpha phosphatase test. When you've knocked that enzyme out, you're good to go because you killed all the bad stuff, because that's an indicator of heat. Well, it also happens to be a very, very anti-inflammatory enzyme. In fact, recent studies done in France, the old French paradox study, where they were looking at wine, red wine, and how the resveratrol decreased inflammation. Well, they figured out that you'd have to drink a truckload of wine. You'd be extremely drunk with a very diseased liver before you'd actually get enough value out of that. But it certainly made you feel good. But they looked at the rest of the Mediterranean diet, and they thought, the French are eating 2.2 pounds, a kilo of cheese a week, and it's raw cheese. And that means that the enzyme alkaline phosphatase is coming through from the raw cheese or the raw milk into the gut and causing this decrease in inflammation throughout the entire body. So very, very powerful in terms of this incredible anti-inflammatory enzyme that's completely annihilated in the pasteurized milk market. And a lot of the cheeses, obviously, as well. So raw, really important. Another one, the oligosaccharides, one of my favorites. Dr. Bruce German at UC Davis just 10 years ago discovered this. Oligosaccharides are a very important sugar found in breast milk and in raw milk. Well, the interesting thing about oligosaccharide is it's not digestible by the baby's body. So why would the third most prevalent sugar found in baby's milk or mom's milk even be there if it wasn't going to feed the baby with some sugar and energy? Well, he discovered that it didn't feed the baby. It fed the bacteria in the baby's gut. And what it did was it increased the populations of bifidobacteria, which are good for you, and it suppressed pathogenic bacteria, which are bad for you. Therefore, the baby thrived. Very, very powerful, just about the oligosaccharides. These are the wonderful buried secrets of all these elements found in raw milk. So it's not just the biodiversity of good bacteria found in milk. It's all the other protein-based and enzyme-based systems that work together with that bacteria and the body to regulate the immune system, to bring it into check and adapt the environment as the baby starts to grow in life. Wonderful stuff. Because what do we have today? Adults have a completely messed up immune system that's out of control. Fighting itself, eating itself, autoimmune diseases. What does raw milk do? It brings that balance back. It doesn't overreact. It just reacts just enough to do what it needs to do and come back and reduce the inflammation, do all the things it's supposed to do. This is really powerful stuff. And it's not rocket science. It's mom's breast milk as an example that other mammals can follow and help us with. So this is pretty interesting stuff here. And it goes on and on and on, which I'm not going to get into all this stuff. But when you pasteurize it, they're literally annihilated. These right here allow for very cheap milk coming from 10,000 cow dairies without much regard for sanitation, because guess what? You're going to cook it. So you don't get values in cooked milk when you get it from the raw form. And that's the power here of what we're seeing in human milk and cow's milk. They're not exactly the same. They're quite different, really. But all these factors are different levels and stuff because they're from different species, but they act the same in the gut, or very similar in the gut. So pretty important here in terms of educating people about how their gut works and how raw milk might affect it. Studies. There's about 40 studies now in Europe, very few in the United States. Why? Thank you. The reason that there's not a lot of studies in the United States is because in the United States, studies are funded by the National Institutes of Health, the NIH, which is an FDA-associated organization, or big industry. Why would the processors want anything good to be found out about raw milk? They don't get to process it. It's a farm-to-consumer product. But in Europe, they have an entirely different social fabric in terms of figuring out what's right for countries under a social welfare system or social health system, and they want to know the truth, regardless of, as a result. So in Europe, you see these huge studies done, like the Parcel study, the Gabriella study, all these studies here. There's a couple in the United States, but they show that really has an impact on the children's health. In fact, one study showed that asthma, allergies, eczema, colds, and flu and ear infections reduced dramatically when children drink raw milk from cows. Now, doesn't that make a little sense right now? We're currently in a crisis called coronavirus. These are viruses. The flu is a virus. Coronavirus is a virus. The common cold is a virus. They act similarly on the body. In fact, the scientists tell us that coronavirus is kind of a mild, it's not really a severe one. It only attacks those that have a weakened immune system or missing adaptive immune system. What we're talking about here is these same principles apply exactly if you want to build your immune system that works all the time for you, wherever you are. And I'm not promising you're not going to die of coronavirus. What I'm saying is you will have a fighting chance. You'll have a strong immune system to resist whatever comes towards you because your immune system will be adaptive and it'll work for you properly. The science shows it clearly that colds are reduced dramatically in children that drink raw milk. Colds are viruses. Do the math. It's not hard. So strong immune systems mean you'll thrive and survive. So it's pretty powerful here that the science is there. It's just inconvenient, not convenient. It is what it is. Okay. Here's an interesting one here too. This is breast milk and raw milk out here as a very low allergen. In fact, it's very good for allergies. But as it gets cooked and pasteurized, it becomes very allergenic, and then fully cooked, it's not allergenic again. It's kind of interesting. So this is a pasteurization area here, which is actually very allergenic. And I got this from the University of Utrecht, which is in the Netherlands. The researchers at International Milk Genomics Consortium, they did this study back in 2014, showing the allergenicity is very high in the pasteurized milk, which makes it hard for people to digest, hard for people to deal with that have asthma and allergies because it triggers mast cell upset and release the histamines. So this is interesting to see that, and one of the reasons why pasteurized milk is the #1 most allergenic food on the FDA website, numero uno. And doctors say, oh, get off dairy, get off dairy. They're not saying get on raw dairy, they're saying just get off dairy, which they mean pasteurized dairy. So milk's been destroyed, its reputation has been completely destroyed by modern man, and the value of the underlying breast milk-like, wonderful, non-allergenic, non-lactose intolerance, fantastic immune system building properties have been ignored and suppressed because it's not a profit base for processors. So not good. Here's some pictures of milk under the microscope. This is raw milk on the right side there. Looks like blood, doesn't it? Kind of like blood components, so it's a butterfat. And then you look at the UHT pasteurized, it's very fine there, and that's homogenized as well. And then over here you see 175 times, kind of looks like a coral reef, and that looks like fine sandpaper. And that's the difference of processing makes physically to the milk when you look at it in a microscope. Pretty interesting. Farmers Over Pharmacies has a website. It's not for profit. There's no brands there. There's no mention of my brand or anybody else's brand. It's just talking about whole foods. That's all it talks about. And what we did was case studies, interviewing people that have a story about recovering from chronic disease by restoring their gut. And the case studies are just tearjerkers. This is Tara Rosas. And Tara Rosas came just within weeks, like 3 or 4 weeks from having a colostomy because she had severe Crohn's disease. And here she is, this wonderful, gifted young artist in Los Angeles, and here she is in the hospital with IVs going, on 6-MP and Remicade and other chemotherapy drugs trying to get rid of and suppress the inflammation in her intestines. And she can't date, she can't work, she's in pain, she's losing weight, she's just in bad shape. Bloody stool, just ugly, ugly. And she was told by the doctor, says, well, sometimes these drugs just don't work out so well. And by the way, one of the side effects of Remicade is cancer. So she's going, hey, I'm falling apart here. So she started doing some work. She didn't talk to me, by the way. She started doing some work on the internet, looking at the European studies, and she got into bone broth. She got into raw milk kefir. She got into raw butter. She got into all these anti-inflammatory foods, avocados, olive oil, Mediterranean diet, and she absolutely, completely changed her gut biome. Within 4 months, she was off all drugs, no pain, no diarrhea, feeling great. Within 6 months, she was like a new girl. She put the weight back on. She felt great. Well, that's just one testimonial we have that's a case study of her story. And it's very, very well defined in how that happened. She changed the inflammation factors in her gut. She gave her gut no choice but to recover because that's the food that fed it and the environment it was. No longer antibiotics, no longer corticosteroids, no longer taking drugs, no longer having the issues that precipitated the problem to begin with. And now she's perfectly fine, and she's married, and she has a great job at a dentist's office. She's doing great living in Placerville. That's just one story. And there's many, many more. But it's interesting to see that even little Paxson over here was having huge problems with allergies, asthma, nut allergies, leaky gut syndrome, and littered with deep nutrition. A West State Price gal out of, Annie Drew out of Los Angeles actually fixed him over a 4-month period of time by getting bone broth, raw milk kefir, avocados, olive oil, Mediterranean diet, the same kind of thing that Tara used on this kid over here. And by the way, now he runs track, doesn't have EpiPens, doesn't have any allergies, and doesn't have a leaky gut anymore. His mucosal lining's built back. He's a thriving kid. Before, he used to get blue. He used to have ICU problems with going to the ICU with 911 calls in the morning, taking Epi shots, EpiPens in every room, and epinephrine, and just a horrible situation with allergies to food as well as asthma. So pretty compelling here that we can fix our gut if we determine to do so, and we want to do so. Here's a bunch more case studies we have, including Kameli down here, who had Crohn's disease attending Stanford University. And Kameli came out of Africa. He would have died as a child if he had not suckled directly in the teat of a cow. He lived as a Maasai. And Kameli came to the United States thinking, oh, it's a land of milk and honey. It's going to have all kinds of milk. He started drinking pasteurized milk. He got sicker than a dog. He started drinking soy milk, got even sicker. He was at Stanford University and attending a class with Dr. Chris Gardner, and said, hey, you better go down to the clinic. You're in bad shape. And he did, and he got diagnosed with Crohn's disease. He was going to have to go through all this stuff, but he and I got connected somehow. It was by fate. And there was actually a movie producer in LA that connected us together. But it was interesting. He says, you know what? I'll live in California, but I want to eat in a Maasai. And so he started drinking literally a gallon a day of our milk. And he fully recovered in just a few months. So it was very interesting how he had no problem with milk in unprocessed natural form. And he got rid of his Crohn's disease as well because the inflammation factors and everything. But now he's doing great. In fact, he's got his master's degree working as an international liaison officer for the UN. So that's a wonderful story. And you got Jordan Rubin, Maker's Diet, used raw goat's milk in kefir back in the 90s to recover from literally dying of Crohn's as well. So it's pretty compelling to see these stories uniformly responding like this and actually recovering an immune system which is in bad shape. There's beautiful Tara again and her raw milk kefir, doing great with that. And her story is a video story, make you cry. It's really powerful. Here's something about food safety. I mean, you talk about raw milk, the doctors say, oh, don't drink that, you might die, from 1 drop will kill you. Well, that's not the way it goes. There's raw milk intended for pasteurization, there's raw milk intended for human consumption, and the standards are completely different. Don't ever let anybody tell you they're the same. They're not. They're completely different. In fact, the Raw Milk Institute, which I helped found in 2011, has a wonderful board of directors, works as a nonprofit around the world. We've done work in Great Britain. We've done work in Canada. We've done work in the United States. We've trained 375 farmers in how to produce raw milk in an ultra-low risk set of conditions using training, standards, and testing. We have great testing now where we can actually validate and verify that, in fact, there's no bad bugs in the milk, or the incidence of bad bugs is so low it won't make you sick. It's a sanitation indication stuff. And they actually published a peer-reviewed article in literally September 18th. PubMed Research shows that under PLOS, which is the article that was written, 2 Canadian researchers found that the impact was dramatic. 75% decrease in illnesses, or 76%, and a 350% increase in consumption. which is exactly the opposite of what the FDA says. The more raw milk gets consumed, the more people are going to get sick. The exact opposite occurred because of training in the last 5 to 6 years. And they characterize it as the raw meat effect. You can see this just dramatic drop-off in North America of people getting sick. Pretty compelling. Here's the California experience. We've had hodgepodge outbreaks of mostly Campylobacter in the pack, but in the last 5 years, we've had nothing. The standards, the expectation, the training, everything, you just don't see it. You just don't see it. And it's interesting how we've had a massive increase in raw milk consumption here in California and just don't see any incidents here being reported in the state. Just nobody's getting sick. That's the impact of standards, training, and testing. So raw milk is back in an emerging market. People are embracing it and loving it. And if anybody says it's really, really dangerous, say, yeah, if you go down to local CAFO and you get it, because it's going to be commingled with everybody else's milk, they don't care. It's the raw milk for pasteurization. You might have some problems. Yeah, I agree. But if you go to some place that's actually state inspected, who does their testing and cares, entirely different thing if it's for raw milk for human consumption. So raw milk for pasteurizer, raw milk for people, different products completely. So that's really, really important. This is our milk filter at Organic Pastures here. You can see how it's laying on a lab table, and there's a little lab test there. It's super clean, looks like it's new. Here, this is my neighbor's filter sitting in the back of his truck. And anybody guess what that is? It's poop. That's the milk going through the milk filter to actually capture miscellaneous stuff that the dairyman didn't wipe off the udder, clean off the udder. So 2 different standards, 2 different customers. This guy is selling to a processor, and I'm selling to you and me. Whole different world in terms of the expectations of cleanliness. So I really upset some dairymen once by showing this filter to the dairymen, saying how our milk was so much cleaner than theirs. And they said, don't you ever show that to a customer. That's terrible, terrible. It's terrible for marketing. The problem was, I said, hey guys, if you produce this kind of raw milk, would you be paid any different than the guy who paid for that? No, get the same amount of money. I said, then why would you do that? There's no economic reason to do so. So it's true that, in fact, you may be producing that, and God bless your heart if you are, that's wonderful. But the bottom line is you're not getting paid a dime to do all that extra work, so why would you? Because all this milk in a regular dairy system gets commingled together. Who cares? It goes in the same truck, the milk gets all blended together. So they really got upset with me then because of the fact that they're not getting paid enough, and they're very frustrated. We're seeing a dairy a week being lost in California, and 2.2 dairies lost in Wisconsin. Last year alone, we lost 3,000 dairies in America. We went from 37,000 dairies to 33,000 dairies in 1 year because of gross overproduction of allergenic, hard-to-digest milk with a disconnected consumer-farmer connection completely. And the farmers don't know that consumers are rejecting them because they're connected to a processor, not a consumer that's saying, I don't want this anymore. I'm going to go to soy or almond milk or some other thing that doesn't cause me tummy upset. And by the way, I don't like the way you're treating your calves and your cows either. Look at what happened with Joaquin Phoenix the other night on the Oscars, or the, what was it called? It was the Oscars, wasn't it? He came out saying, don't eat anything from an animal because of the fact they're abusing their animals. Well, he didn't know the farmer. You come to our farm, our cows get hugs and kisses and wonderful pastures and all kinds of great stuff. We never abuse them. They take care of us. We take care of them. Why would we ever do that? But if you go to some of these big dairies, and I say some because most take really good care of their animals, and they're deeply frustrated economically in despair, there may be some abuse sometimes because you know what? These guys are ready to commit suicide, and many do. It's a terrible situation. But it's what's going on, and it's the reality. So this is pretty profound for the people, for the pasteurizer, completely different foods. This is that study showing the massive increase in consumption with the decrease in illness. This is Dr. Whitehead in Aarhus, Denmark with me. Last October, we sponsored their travel with the Raw Milk Institute, and she was there presenting her study of how dramatically reduced the risk is of consuming raw milk in North America today versus 10 years ago. And it's very interesting. 2 other studies are being published. This one was published about 2 weeks ago. Dr. Tom Bars and Kat Berg showing that massive decrease of risk in terms of the standards used for production. And there's one more study coming out this spring as well from Nick Gasolina showing from the Society of Risk Analysis that raw milk production has dropped like major because of training, testing, and standards. So pretty compelling. Here's some data there showing on the bottom, this is in British Columbia, showing 0 pathogens on 160 tests. 0 pathogens. When you go out to the regular dairies, you see up to 21%, 24% of the milk in the tanks have pathogens. Yes, Hannah? Is raw milk still prohibited in Canada? Yes, it is. This is illegal raw milk. Good question. But they're trying to make it legalized by having training and showing the data so they can compel it saying it's not dangerous. And that's the beauty of doing the studies and collecting the data of the Raw Milk Institute, is the fact you can publish this stuff saying, Mr. Canadian Parliament person, minister, would you please look at the hard data here and realize that the reason you don't want raw milk in Canada is because the big dairy industry doesn't want competition. It has nothing to do with the risk to the consumers, and that's the hard data right there. And they're making some headway. So it's pretty interesting. Hard data and science speaking their language really makes a lot of traction in terms of making progress. So yes, that's pretty cool stuff. The standards for Raw Milk Institute, which Organic Pastures is listed. There's 19 other dairies in North America listed, and there's 375 dairies that have received this training, is that here's the standard plate count allowed for pasteurized milk on the farm being shipped to the pasteurizer. 100 standard plate count. Our standard is 5,000, and we run an average of 1,200. Super clean. Post-pasteurized milk has 15,000. Wow. Super clean raw milk. And then this is the call form standards. Call forms, 750 call forms are allowed in milk to be sent to be pasteurized. We have a standard of less than 10, which is the same standard as after pasteurization. And we run a 2.5 standard. I was showing Hannah this morning, I was running less than 1. And we're milking 680 cows. So incredibly clean, tested for pathogens. It's a different product. And we cannot be listening to our doctors saying, oh, it's too dangerous, because they don't know what they're talking about because they were never trained in it. They know a lot about how to cut your knee apart and fix your knee. Yeah, that's great. But they don't know about nutrition, and they certainly don't know about these things that have not been around when they were in medical school. They don't get continuing education about this. They find about the new pharma drugs, but they don't find about the nutritional ways about which our great-grandparents would have told us all about, but we've forgotten about because it was not convenient for the pharmaceutical companies to make a lot of money. Farmers over pharmacies here. So pretty powerful, compelling arguments. When we look at food safety, we look from grass to glass. We look at water, wild animals. Some wild animals have tuberculosis, like deer. We don't want them connected to our animals on pastures. Pasture conditions, udders, how clean are they? Are they laying down a bunch of manure? Is the manure dry? Is it wet? Cleaning, animal feed, temperatures, chilling, testing, training, all these things and many, many more. So we keep clean, clean, cold, cold, hot, hot, green, green, all the time. And as a result, you end up with a completely different product. This condition is certainly what we encourage. If you think about that person, that human a long time ago looking at the sun going, I can't eat the sun, I can't eat the grass because I don't have 4 stomachs. And I can eat what that cow just converted from the sun and grass, though. And that's that beautiful relationship there, symbiotic relationship with cow and man. But this right here is the CAFO environment, and that's not the worst of it. I mean, you can get away with a little bit of that, but when you use antibiotics and hormones and lots of grain, you start changing the conditions in which that milk is not safe. It's not safe anymore. This is a crisis in organic dairy that I'll touch on, which is really important. When you go down to the store and you look at your organic milk and you get it, it's probably going to be ultra-high temperature pasteurized, not raw. And what's interesting about it is there's a crisis in organic dairy because the lack of enforcement at the USDA on the organic rules. You're supposed to pasture your cows in organics. 120 days a year, 30% dry matter comes from pastures. They're not doing that. We have these massive dairies, there's 8 of them now, all 10,000 cow plus dairies, some of these higher than 15,000 cows between Texas and Colorado. And the national brands, like the 365 brands at Whole Foods and so on, are buying, even the Target brands are buying milk from this dairy and calling it organic because they do hold an organic certificate because the USDA has not enforced the organic pasture rule on that dairy, and now they're a 10,000 cow dairy. What I find fascinating is the origins of why that's going on. I was in the room at the USDA in September of 23rd of 2018 with the National Farmers Union. I'm a National Farmers Union representative for California. And I heard Mr. Gregory Eibach, who's the Undersecretary of Agriculture under Sonny Perdue in the USDA, say to a room full of farmers, he said, this is just a big misunderstanding. With the growing organic consumer demand, this is just the industrial solution. The room about hung him. They were so upset. And the fact that this is just a big misunderstanding, the fact that you can have a big CAFO and call it organic was just their cozy little Washington politics thing with big CAFO dairies making millions of dollars lying to the public. So be cautious of what you buy at the stores. The organic brands are probably going to be ultra high temperature pasteurized. So if you want what we're talking about, it's going to be the raw stuff. The raw stuff. And it's going to say raw right in the front. It's not going to be ultra-high temperature pasteurized. It's just a backstory behind what's going on, which is total corruption, in my opinion, and the opinions of so many farmers. In fact, California just lost 30 organic dairies about a month ago because of the loss of contracts, because this milk's just sweeping the nation at super dirt cheap prices. When they can produce that milk in that CAFO for $23 a hundredweight, and it costs you $32 to break even on organic dairy, guess what's going to happen? Massive cheating on the regular organic dairy. So these poor dairymen are losing their operations. It's desperate. They feel betrayed. Here in California, it's really sad. A lot of organic milk's being sold for conventional, and they actually have conventional milk being dumped down the drain. So it's just, it's anarchy. There is a solution. It's called supply management, and a lot of talk has been working on that. The National Farmers Union come up with a policy, and so has the National American Association of the Farm Bureau has come up with policies actually supporting a supply management or growth management system where all the farmers work together to not overproduce and bring their milk production down in balance with the demand, and you can actually get a reasonable price. And the studies done show that it doesn't change the price to the consumers. It's like within pennies. And it's fair. And you don't see farmers wishing their neighbor would die so they could be the king of the hill. It's working together instead of apart. So that's coming on. I think the next couple of years, you're probably going to see a supply management system for the commodity milks. But I think that the raw guys are going to probably be independent because they don't commingle their milk into that system and they go directly to the consumer. And there's a whole lot more work to be done on a raw dairy than there is on a conventional dairy because they have to worry about safety and testing. So just some backstory that's really important to touch on with the whole milk thing going on. The origin of this current policy was Earl Butz, who was the Undersecretary of Agriculture under Nixon back in 1972. He said, get big or get out. Well, that big or get out is actually this huge consolidation of all these dairies together, create this commodity market system. And when he also said, when you hear the word organic, think starvation. So he was not an organic kind of thinker kind of guy. That's the kind of system he was. So we've had a loss of family farms and consolidation of CAFOs because of this early policy. That's changing now. We're starting to see an evolution back. How much more are we at there? 5. Okay, we're almost wrapped up. The dark ages of raw milk started in the 1860s and through 1920s. Because people were bringing their milk, their cows to the cities with them. And when they did that, there was no pastures or clean water in the cities. And as a result, you saw nothing but a disgusting mess with typhoid, tuberculosis, and so on and so forth. And that was when pasteurization began in 1893. But instead of cleaning up the problem, they just killed the problem. And now we're actually surviving the aftermath of that whole not cleaning up the problem. There was a doctor, Dr. Coit, back in 1893 that actually started the American Association of Medical Milk Commissions. And that was an organization that had physicians supervising milk production to make sure it was clean and safe. And that thrived. And the last dairy to be certified by the AAMMC was Altadena Dairy in Los Angeles in 1999. And they went out of business by selling to Dean's Foods. So interesting story of raw milk. But now we have better science. We understand the water. We can do this really, really well and actually thrive. The science of raw milk goes back thousands of years, where we actually see evidence of dairy in these Croatian pots in Croatia. And we see milk proteins all over the place in the world in terms of understanding our relationship with lactase, lactose, and eating milk in dairy products. So when you look at whole foods, it's really important to understand what these foods look like. And you have to kind of dig around a little bit to find them because most of them are highly processed. So you have to look at seafoods and meats and all these kinds of things to make sure that the dairy products are raw or less processed, to assure that, in fact, you're getting the whole food. Pasture-based, if you can get that. But you have to do some study to make sure you're getting a whole food. And so you have to kind of reorient yourself to discover what we are as humans and how we're going to feed our biome if we intend to have a strong immune system. Really, really important. It's done by whole foods. So you would not put a tablet in your mouth with probiotics expecting that tablet to go down your lower gut and thrive unless there was food already there to feed it. So if you want, the tablet's an alligator. You want an alligator to thrive, you would put it into a swamp, right? Lots of water and environment. You'd never put it out in the middle of a desert because it would die. So it's important to understand that if you're going to take probiotics, make sure that it's combined with whole food nutrition and make sure the food itself is the matrix of which actually will thrive. And that way your immune system will actually respond. And the quote here is, we must rewild our gut. That comes from the premier scientist in the world, Dr. Bruce German at UC Davis. The blue zones, almost finished here, are those areas around the world. We have them in Loma Linda, LA. Loma Linda. We got in Costa Rica, Sardinia, Arcadia, Greece, Icaria, Greece, excuse me, Okinawa, Japan. All those places have their populations grow 15 to 20% longer in terms of their lifespans and actually have less disease. And it's interesting that they get lots of love, less stress, they eat a whole food diet. There's some raw cheeses being consumed there too, and they see kind of a Mediterranean type diet throughout all these areas. So a Mediterranean type diet with raw cheeses and these wonderful foods actually do very, very well and live the longest lives. I won't make a claim here, but it's an interesting assumption. In Loma Linda area, our dairy sells more raw milk than any other place in California, which is, I'm not sure if there's a correlation there, but it's interesting to see that Clark's Nutrition and Sprouts in that San Bernardino area just on fire with product sales, and it's also within that blue zone area, which are Seventh-day Adventists. Trends in California, the marketing research from the Got Milk people identified 5 trends. Obviously, we see plant-based, it's going crazy, but they also say farm to consumer, or farm to table, ethical and eco-conscious, organic / unprocessed, and gut health. I'm proud to say that we check about 80% of those boxes. And that's kind of interesting because that's a marketing research done by the Got Milk people, spent $1 million to figure out what the truth was. And by the way, they're not doing a lot of that on the CAFO operations. So these are the marketing trends. They're scratching their heads going, how do we fix that? How do we do that? And we've been doing that for 20 years. Pretty interesting stuff. So raw milk is the first food of life. It's the only food that has endured the generation by generation selective pressures of evolution, which is really, really important in terms of understanding the optimal food to make the next generation really thrive. And so the only food on Earth that has that purpose. And we can capitalize on that from other animals and mammals to actually thrive ourselves. So it's, you're messing with life on Earth when you try to exterminate bacteria and its forces of good. We need to have their forces of good on our side. So you really have to connect to a farmer, guys. And we know that here. I'm talking to the choir. But the bottom line is it's critical we nourish our biomes if we intend to have strong immune systems. Don't be a part of the statistic. Don't have a depressed immune system. Your immune system works all times, all the time. That flu vaccine that you might get once in a while, that shot, the incidence of actually having it work is very, very low. Because every year the flu is different. But guess what? If you have an immune system with biodiversity of ability to fight whatever's coming towards you and it's adaptive, you'll have already been vaccinated because of the way you eat. And you'll be strong and you'll have an immune system that can deal with that, whatever threat coming through you, especially in your children. So that's my presentation for today. It's Farmers Over Pharmacies. Embrace whole food nutrition and get to know your farmer. Thank you. Yes, question.
So, my mind's just racing.
Your mind is racing. I like that.
I'm a doctorate student and I'm a researcher.
Nice to meet you, Mark McAfee.
Nice to meet you. Myself and all of my children are lactose intolerant.
Well, we call that pasteurization intolerance.
That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
So, my question is, with regards to your farm,
Yep.
do you vaccinate your cows?
Yes, we're required by law. I don't have a choice. Not the cows, the calves. There's a bangs vaccination we have to do, whether we like it or not, or we won't have a raw milk dairy permit. A bangs vaccination has to do with brucellosis. There's not a lot of vaccinations, only one or maybe 2 that we have to do. Brucellosis is one of them. Yes, we do.
Do you know who the manufacturers are?
I'd have to look.
Okay. Can I get with you on a side note
the
for that?
veterinarians come out and do that thing. I think you're looking at the RB51. You're concerned about RB51 in terms of bangs vaccination. They had a problem back in Pennsylvania. They were vaccinating with the wrong thing. It was genetically modified, and people got sick because of the way it was vaccinated the cows. We drilled down in the state, and they made sure that, in fact, they did not have that. But the bottom line is, yes, it's a concern, but at the same time, it's required by law. I want to have legal raw milk in the stores, and so we have to do that, or we'll have our permits canceled.
Is there a way that we could legislatively do something to change that?
Don't know.
No.
Don't
Okay.
know.
All right.
I
Well,
do
thank
not
you.
know.
Thank you for your.
Changing the law with regards to raw milk standards is like trying to move the moon 5 inches to the right or left. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
I'm with you on everything you said. I have a sort of unrelated question.
Okay.
Sally Fallon Morel, also, like, she has an organic farm, and she's commented that once the cows stop producing milk, they get processed. What do you do, and what happens with your cows once
We have
they stop?
delicious ground beef.
Yeah? And
Yes,
so-
absolutely. We do not lose any scrap of our animals. Our animals live a whole, complete life, and they serve us very, very well.
So you mean your family uses those, or how?
About 20% of the cows every year are slaughtered. and it's done at a humane certified facility, USDA, and they become ground beef, and we sell that in the farmers markets as organic ground beef. And it's delicious. We don't cut the cow up into like a steak or a tri-tip. It all goes into ground beef, so you get the best cuts all together with the least cuts. And let me say a little something about veganism real fast. Remember, breast milk is raw milk from a plant? No, an animal. Women are animals. Some are more fierce than others. The bottom line is we need these fats in our brain to develop our brains, to insulate our nerves. Critical that we do so. And when you don't, there are people that have actually gone to jail. In Belgium, there's good examples. In Florida, there's examples of children that were never breastfed and given 100% vegan diets with zero animal fat. And guess what? Their brains failed to develop, and they actually died or became very, very screwed up. And so it is absolutely imperative that we get with our vegan friends. The vegetarians are doing fine. They've got the eggs and they got the milk going on, and that's all cool. But when you've got a vegan friend who is absolutely a nervous wreck, they get migraines and they're shaking like a leaf and they can't think straight and they can't concentrate. It's because they're missing their animal fats. Why do we know that? Because vitamin B12 and the good fats come from dairy products. They come from meat. And we are designed, our teeth, our lineage, our everything is designed to have that, and without it, we fail. So it's very important. And if they want to just go with some whipped cream, my God, strawberries and whipped cream. Be easy on yourself. Whipped cream is delicious, and my God, it's fast and it's delicious, and you're good to go. But the point I'm saying is, it's really sad to see Joaquin Phoenix suffering because he's concerned about animal welfare. I totally understand and agree with what he's saying with animal welfare, 100%. But we have to get beyond that. You have to go meet the farmer. You have to understand that some farmers really love their animals and take really good care of them in the best conditions. And you can embrace those farmers versus those that don't. That's my answer. Yes, sir. Yeah. Okay, we're done. You have one more question? Okay. One overtime here. I like that.
I'm glad it's me. I have 3 questions.
Sure.
All right. What if I already have an autoimmune Hashimoto's and vitiligo? I've been told that if I build my immune system, I'll just attack myself more. Is that?
I have a very good friend of mine who has Hashimoto's, and they have a hard time. I don't want to disappoint you because I don't know enough about what you would do once you've been diagnosed. And there's kind of this idea of going over the tipping point where you go from you can prevent it to actually you're now suffering it. And
Since age 18, and they radiated my thyroid without me knowing it, so I don't have
I
one.
don't have a great answer for you,
Okay.
but I do know that a strong immune system is very important so you don't get sick.
Yeah.
If your immune system is too strong and it tends to fight itself, something else is going on.
Okay.
And so I can't give you some real good advice. The advice is similar to when you have a organ transplant and you're given immune suppressing drugs because you don't want to reject your own organ. Does that person want to build a strong immune system? It's a great question, and I don't have an answer.
Okay. Then also, I'm a nutrition consultant, but studied my whole life. But word on the street is, whether it's raw milk or whatever, that we're not meant to have milk from a cow, when you're an adult. How does raw milk speak to that? Is that wrong?
That is a current concept
Yes.
based on a disconnection from the farm.
Okay.
For 10,000 years, we've been closely connected to raw milks.
Okay,
and
good.
cheeses and butter and cream and kefir as a very important product. Go ahead.
Okay. And then the Aurora that says it's organic, but
Yep.
it's not, does it say it's raw?
No,
Oh,
absolutely.
okay. All
No,
right.
no,
So
no.
we're cool with just raw.
Raw.
Yeah.
If it says raw, it's raw.
Okay.
Yep.
And thank you so much for this and for what you're doing.
You're very welcome. It's my pleasure. Thank you. We're wrapped up, I think. Yeah. Thank you. All right.